Okay, hi. This is part 2 of the video for Unit 3. So to recap what we were doing in video 1, or part 1 of the Unit 3 lecture videos, we were looking at the way in which Ono and exports work, connect to the beauty myth, and how they both function to deconstruct and subvert the notion of the objectness of women within patriarchal worlds. So Ono and exports works are powerful because they contest the myth of the objectness of femininity within a patriarchal context. And the way that they do this is that both artists, both performance artists, instruct their audiences to cut or touch them in their performance work. So only a subject can direct you to cut a piece of their clothing off in a performance art piece. Only a subject can direct you to touch them as part of a performance art piece. So it's a play on that binary of subject and object, and it functions to reveal the extent to which that idea of the objectness of women within a patriarchal world is constructed. Women have always been subjects, but they've been denied the status of subjectivity, whether through laws, whether it be through social norms, whether it be the restrictions of the patriarchal heterosexual family. All of these institutions, whether it be through religion, all of these institutions have functioned to normalize the idea of the objectness of woman. But women have always been subjects. Again, you also want to think about the connection here to violence. So Ono shows the way in which consent to one thing, when it is a woman who is consenting to one thing, is oftentimes interpreted by persons who are educated in their subjective power, or their right as subjects to the bodies of those that are constructed as objects, is interpreted or read as consent to anything. So watch the change in Ono's facial expression as the video continues. So people begin by being hesitant. They're hesitant to cut her clothing, even though this is part of an artwork. And by the end, they are no longer hesitant, and consent to cutting a piece of clothing and taking that piece of clothing with you becomes something much darker. It becomes an act of humiliation. So we want to consider the ways in which we interpret when marginalized populations consent to something, that it means they've consented to anything, that they've given away their right of subjectivity, and that we have the right to access their bodies in any way that we see fit as subjects. So all of these self-representations in this unit are also connected to Butler's theory of performativity of gender. So this theory that Butler and other queer theorists and feminist theorists and critical race theorists put forth is basically the idea that gender doesn't live inside of us. Gender's being derives from the recitation of norms of gender identity. So my femininity doesn't reside in me. It exists in the fact that I recite through my activity, through my behavior, through the way in which I wear my hair, through the way that I do my makeup, through the kinds of activities that I engage in. I reference femininity, and thus by referencing over and over again femininity through my behavior, through the way in which I wear my gender identity, I become understood as feminine. So femininity exists out there in the social world, and it's through the recitation of the norms of femininity that I become cloaked in femininity, and thus am identified as a woman, or as a feminine identified person, or as a femme person, etc. The same thing's true for Butler and for other postmodern theorists in regard to selfhood itself. So in the Intro to Interfaces, you had a little bit of an introduction to postmodernism as well. And postmodern theorists assert that the self is also a construction. So that I is a construction, and part of the way in which that I appears in the world is within a patriarchal world. especially within a hetero-patriarchal world, is through reference to gender identity. So subjects can only become meaningful or derive meaning through first being gendered within a social world. So the I has to be gendered within a patriarchal context. And again, this will become relevant also when we move to Unit 4 and we look at sexual orientation, when we look at trans identity, and when we look at non-binary gender identities. So we'll be thinking about the way in which understandability, the ability to understand someone, is oftentimes constructed within a binary codified system of gender identity itself. So again, my femininity isn't something that exists deep within me, but rather it exists in the world, and it comes into being for subjects when it is cited over and over again. And the second part of this, again, is a consideration of the way in which we can be recognized as subjects only when we're made sense of or make sense within a binary system of gender identity, i.e. cisgender woman, cisgender man. And so we are recognized as human only when we're normatively gendered. This is the second part of this that will be important for next unit. So in order for that second part to occur, any gender identity that falls outside of cisgender man or cisgender masculinity or cisgender woman or cisgender femininity has to be abjected. It has to be cast out in order to retain the knowability or the meaning of selfhood within a patriarchal world. All right, so finally, I want to give you a couple more notes on the performance art pieces that are covered in your interfaces text. So looking at the essay by Ferris, Cooking Up the Self. In this essay, Ferris looks at the work of Bobby Baker and Blondell Cummings, and both of these works function to show us how the work of feminine identified peoples themselves is oftentimes erased, especially work that occurs within the familial home. So Baker does this specifically through setting her performance art in her kitchen, in her familial home, in her kitchen. So in the same way that you'd line up outside of a theater door, give the usher your ticket, and then go into the theater, be seated by the usher in your seat. You stand outside of Bobby Baker's home, you give an usher a ticket, and you're escorted into her family kitchen. And so it's a subverting of this very space, the kind of like public space where art can occur, through making the familial home the space where art is going to occur. Furthermore, Baker references this theory of gender performativity in her work by performing a series of 13 actions that mark the body, that mark her literal body. And you'll see this in reading the essay. You'll see the actions and then the marks that they leave on her body. So the idea is that through performing the work that the feminine has always done in the family, in terms of the community, in terms of the social, etc., women are not just contributing to their families, they're not just contributing to the community, but they're also making themselves. So it is inaccurate to refer to the stay-at-home parent or the homemaker as not performing work, because they do the work of production within the familial home that has public effect, but they're also making themselves. They are creating identity for themselves. So stay-at-home parent doesn't not have an identity, though within a capitalist context, that is how it is framed. The same thing is true in terms of our understanding of the concept of work itself. Productivity occurs within the home as well. It doesn't just occur out in the public realm. So it's a play on this idea of privacy and public as well, that the public space is where work occurs, and where the political exists, and that the private home is the space where in which there is no work, where one has the luxury of relaxation, etc., and where identity can't be constructed. So it's a problematizing of that binary as well. Finally, Cummings' work is very similar to Baker's work as well, but she's using interpretive dance to trace the lines of the tradition of the feminine, or traditions of the feminine, or traditions of femininity within the familial line itself. So you see Cummings performing the same act over and over again in order to show this lineage, this passing down of the work of the feminine within the family home. So she shows the work of femininity to be valuable and to be what inevitably continues the family itself. And this is subversive in that when we think of the way in which the family is oftentimes organized is through naming traditions. So if you think about traditions of marriage, if you think about traditions of the surnames that children are oftentimes given, these are patriarchal traditions. They trace the lineage of the family through the line of the father. This is referred to as patrilineal patrilineal understanding of the family. So we're thinking about new ways of putting the mother back in or putting the feminine figure back in, and Cummings is referencing this. So rather than a mere process of naming, of objectifying, naming is also objectifying. It's making something into an object that can be known. The work of the feminine is much more fluid, and it functions through the performance of care or the performance of making or production. It isn't a flattening of the marks of the family in order to understand or to consume or to know. Rather, the work of the feminine oftentimes occurs through this more amorphous function of work. And Cummings shows this. She shows that the family space, and thus the family itself, is created and recreated through the work of feminine bodies. It is an embodied creation rather than an intellectual assigning of belonging through naming. And naming can also be reductive. It can function as reductive. Because if you think about even the constructs of language, through using language, we attempt to make known or to reveal being, but in doing so, we often also limit. We impose limits on what something can be through containing it through a definition, and the same thing can be said through naming as well. All right, so that's it for this video. Again, it's divided into 2 parts, so make sure you watch both parts of it. Also, again, make sure that you read the lectures, the lecture notes that I've given you, that you look at all of the readings, that you watch the videos, and that you are participating in the discussion boards and submitting your second paper or your Unit 3 paper this unit as well. All right, have a great day.